Greetings, this is Stasia Bliss. This video I'm making in response to a woman who wrote me a message asking me this. She said, "Where do I begin in regards to becoming a fully embodied divine feminine, as well as a sovereign individual, and where to primarily direct my energy as I begin to assist in the advancement of planetary evolution and the saving of the species Mama Gaia?" Okay, where do we begin? And this can go to men and women, how to become a fully embodied divine feminine or divine masculine and a sovereign individual. So the first place that we all need to begin is by taking responsibility for our thoughts, feelings, emotions, actions, and the reality that we perceive ourselves. So we can start this in a very basic quantum physics lesson, and that is that the observer, which is always the self, affects reality. That's it. Observer affects reality. Reality is behaving a certain way, observer steps in, reality changes in accordance to the observer. So when you know that little piece and you apply it in your life, then you know that you are not just simply witnessing actions and reactions of reality and then somehow trying to play off of those, but instead your very thought, your very belief, your very action is always affecting reality. And it's starting at the micro of yourself, but it is holographically rippling out into reality all the time. The reason we don't continually see this upgrade, upgrade, upgrade in the reality that we're perceiving is we're always going back and forth, like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 1 step forward, 2 steps back, in perceiving and then kind of questioning ourselves. And like now we're going, wait, did I affect reality or is reality affecting me? And we keep going back and forth into this process where we're not like fully convinced yet that we are the cause of our reality. And becoming a divine feminine or divine masculine is really not a becoming process at all. We already are these things. What it is a remembering. It's a remembering. If our entire member is oneness, is wholeness, is completeness, is perfection, but it's been fractured, and even fractured by ourselves in order to have the experience. But now we are remembering, we're bringing the fractures back so that we can perceive oneness again. Then we need to recognize how potent our experiences are in relationship to the wholeness. So that, again, is the responsibility piece. Recognizing that your thoughts, behaviors, patterns are being seen in the world around, and it's also a collective thing. You know, we can look at it both as the singularity, I am my reality is me, and we can also look at it as a collective of all the different aspects of oneness contributing to the wholeness that we see. And as I change my portion, the portion that is me in each part of reality is also changing. One way you can look at that is if you are very strong in your own personal sense of identity as source, as divine, you become a leader in the wave of consciousness changing. So even if we're just looking at it as a holographic representation and everyone is the one, but also in everyone there's a piece of them that's me, when I change my piece, then the piece in every person I see that's me also changes. So the stronger that I get in my resolve, the more influence that has on that holographic piece in everyone else. I become a leader energetically to begin to dictate the flow that I'm seeing around me and to become confident in that. That's how, when you become a sovereign individual, you begin to recognize Nothing really has sway over me. There is this reality that's been built up by whatever mind or minds that have created specific structures that all the so-called individuals are playing into in order to experience, what they perceive as a safety or security or education or whatever. But as a sovereign being, we recognize my safety, my security, my empowerment, my food, my shelter, my clothing, my needs, and my empowerment and my ability to heal, and all of that comes from source, not from these structures. These structures are sub-creations. They're stepped down creations of the wholeness emanating from source. Source is the power point. It's what we're all plugged into. But there have been some who have plugged in, but then have kind of distorted that reality and created substructures that everyone else is plugged into. So when you unplug from the structures as being, your security or your feed, and you plug back into source, then we're superseding. We're going above or beyond or outside the box, so to speak, and we're creating an entirely different reality. And it's not even that we're creating it. It's just, again, that we're remembering it. We're going to the place of memory. We're going to the place of original intent, the original divine blueprint, if you will, of this whole thing. So imagine the original thought that created this matrix reality that we're in. Imagine that coming from just one mind, one consciousness, deciding to fracture itself for the experience of this. And because it's fractured, it's containing a portion of itself in all parts. And that portion then develops its own identity, its own sub-creation. It's identifying with the reality around it as being truth instead of the ultimate reality. And once that begins to feel out of alignment, certain parts of the wholeness of the fractures begin to wake up and decide to remember the wholeness from which we came, which we are. That's what we're in the process of doing now. So to begin again to remember our divinity is to take responsibility. Like, I put myself in this position. I am the oneness, which fractured myself and am now remembering myself, waking up from the dream which I put myself into. Does that make sense? So whether you're in masculine or feminine form, it doesn't matter. We're all emanating from an androgynous source. Now, each masculine and feminine component contain, an expression of the wholeness, and it's meant to be so, I believe, to encourage us to remember, to come together. So feminine is containing access to the unknown, to the vastness, to the dark matter, to the black hole, to the creative potentiality. The masculine is containing access to the form, the structure, the creation. What's interesting is that's true at a higher level, at a more cosmic level. What we get to embody here, now, my challenge to you to become a sovereign being is to recognize, unlike a lot of the old spiritual traditions which brought us to this point in our evolution, we are at a new point in evolution where it's not about leaving these bodies and going back into the oneness. If there's only one, then these bodies are a part of that. If everything is God, then these bodies are God too. So we're not trying to escape into nirvana. We aren't going, oh, we're born and then we're going to die and we're going to leave these forms and we're going to go back to the oneness. Like, what are these forms? Some would argue they're illusion. And okay, I can go along with that as well, but they're only an illusion in so much as you don't have consciousness in them. Yeah? If you create a video game, it's an illusion. You have these characters you're playing from far away. But if suddenly those characters gain consciousness and they can decide what's going on in the game, they're not an illusion anymore. They've suddenly begun to embody that original creator energy, and they're an extension of the creator. Okay, so as we wake up, and I think this is the point of this part of the evolutionary cycle, is as we wake up to remembering who we are, these forms become animated with consciousness. That means the creator energy from which we emanate is us. And now, just like in the old Hindu traditions, consciousness, or the awareness of this fact, is masculine, which is in everything. We all have consciousness. Just to what degree, to what level of chakra do we have open of that consciousness? Which valves are released? How much consciousness? How deep is the water of our consciousness? Is it just in primal instincts? Is it just in sexuality? Is it to the level of motivation and empowerment? Is it up to the level of healing? Is it up to the level of speaking our truth? Is it up to the level of being able to see the two realities, or to know everything as one? How much fluidity do you have in your consciousness? That's the masculine component. That's the backdrop. That's the space holder. That's Shiva lying on the cremation grounds where Kali dances on him. Kali is the feminine. She, in this body, is the form. She is banishing ignorance and illusion by saying, this is not an illusion anymore when you're standing on the base of consciousness. And I cut off the heads of the old reality. And I stand with consciousness firmly as my base, as a sovereign being, knowing I am the one, and every other sovereign being is also the one. And together, we are remembering ourselves as the body of Christ. Christ is the illuminated one, the awakened one, the Christed one, the open third eye, the open crown, the crown of thorns. Roses have thorns. Roses are beautiful, and they represent the many layers of opening of consciousness. But they have thorns. It's not all like soft petals and beautiful fragrance. It's a task. It's difficult. You bleed when you're pricked with the thorns of awakening. The crown of thorns, the ripping away of the previous structure that happens when you bring consciousness into the crown, when you realize that there is oneness happening, occurring all the time, pervading everything. That's kind of a crown of thorns. If no one else can see it and you do, it's like, oh, shit, I see this. No one else does. I'm living in a different dimension. But I would crucify myself on behalf of this awareness coming down more fully into the grid. And that's what Jesus the Christ was said to do. But it can also be a metaphor if you want to look at it that way. when that energy came down or comes down your spine through birth into this dimension, and it lands in your base root chakra, and then it ascends again to my father and mother, the right and left hemispheres of the brain, up the spine, the straight and narrow, the rod of iron. Narrow is the path of the tiny Brahmi in the Sushumna, the channel that runs up to the pineal gland and awakens you to the remembrance of who you are. When no one else is really doing that around you, that's a tough path. It feels like you're alone. It feels like you are a martyr. It feels like you are just doing it to set in motion in the collective brain a new neurological pathway for existence. Kind of going on a rant here, but we're all, as we're awakening, assisting in planetary evolution by fully embodying our divine essence as much as we can. And that means we're not playing into this reality more than we have to for basic things. And even those basic things can be elevated and changed. And we can begin to recognize that when we know that everything that we need is provided for us and we let it go, that we have to worry, it starts coming in known and unknown ways so that we can do the work, so that we can do the holding of the grid for more and more and more of the body of Christ, the body of mankind, humankind, to wake up and to experience that consciousness in form. So we can leave the death disease paradigm that we've been living in and experiencing. The last enemy you shall conquer is death, says Jesus the Christ. And we can enter the eternal now presence of the immortal existence of our soul, which is the oneness, but this time in form. What if we don't just go back into a big oneness blob this time? What if we stay as, quote, separate but connected? I think that's beautiful. And I think our soul wants to know what that feels like. Our essence wants to know how it feels to relate in the dance of relationship while fully conscious, while emotionally mature, while released from the shackles of the old world of death and disease and shame and guilt and fear, into the age of truth, into the age of Satya Yoga. So, again, to begin, taking responsibility that everything you see is a creation emanating from you. And if you don't like it, perhaps there is some layers in your field that are still bleeding through from old lifetimes, from your ancestors, from your early childhood, and you need to clean those up. You need to do some karmic release, some emotional clearing. That's what I do. I am a karmic release specialist, an emotional clearing practitioner. I work with the Akasha to clear those layers so you can access this true space of oneness in yourself. So that's first. And when you're clear of those things, you're sovereign, you're unaffected. You can tell when something's affecting you emotionally, mentally, energetically. You can tell when someone's trying to thread you with their cords, with their stuff, and they're throwing it on you. You can tell because you're sovereign. You're not in the system anymore. You've pulled yourself out. And then you help planetary evolution because the planet only evolves to the degree of its lowest common denominator. So we're pushing it from the top, but we're also dragging it. So we got to lift humanity by going into our deepest, darkest zones and blessing those places up. So where do you most shame yourself still? Where do you still consider something you don't want to tell anyone about you, or that you think is something you should stop or you feel guilty about, even if it's small? Even if you're awake and you have a small spot, sweet spot, you just want to love that spot. That's your lowest common denominator. That's equal to, quote, the scum of the earth in manifest form. So love that shit so it can raise up vibrationally and we can all go to the next level.